All right. How about if I ask you a few questions? Oh, fantastic.
I am part of the campaign, so if
You're part of Gary Johnson's campaign? You are.
PA wing, I'm the assistant state director. So if it's questions that I'm not asking on part of the campaign, I have to make it clear that it's not like campaign stances.
So now, I hear you're polling very well, by the way. Gary Johnson's polling very well. So before we get into the horse race, I just want to ask you a few things about libertarianism in general, right? So how would you describe your Gary Johnson's brand of libertarianism?
Realistically, just the normal American ideology of social issues with a realistic business stance. Um, Gay rights, marriage equality, legalized pot, all these, realistically, when you look at the normal American, these are just common sense. But when it comes to things like government, it's an evaluation that more government is not solving the issues. To put more government in to solve what government has already done, it's just, for us at least, is counterproductive. Governor Johnson, ex-two-term governor of New Mexico, he cut the budget, he stopped government growth, and he decreased New Mexico's unemployment rate significantly. And at the same time, didn't raise taxes at all, actually cut taxes significant times, left the state in a better shape, and with more schools, highways, and everything they told us we couldn't do without government. So it's really just I'm done with the garbage that is continuing.
The Democrats, their big idea this year is that Bernie and Hillary got together and they compromised on tuition-free state colleges for families making under $125,000. Does Gary Johnson have a plan to help make college tuition more affordable or to ease the debt of the current college students?
In many ways, yes. It's an inverse of the liberal position on it. It's always been a strong libertarian position that the overreach of government subsidies for education programs allow these institutions to raise costs dramatically because it's a guaranteed paycheck for them. Reducing these while cutting out a handful of people from going to college would make the market infinitely more competitive. The average person that can't afford, a class up at Temple University today might be able to, simply because Temple will have to lower their costs to stay competitive and keep people coming.
So you're saying the government providing subsidies for poor people or lower income people to go to college currently is what's driving up tuition prices?
Not necessarily, to an extent.
The New York Fed did a study which found that was the case.
Yes.
So they say, can you tell me that?
Yes, the New York Fed did a study that finds that that's the case. There needs to be a network for people that legitimately cannot afford it, whether that needs to be federal, state, or a charity-based network is above my pay grade. But
what about, say, grammar school, high school? That should still remain free, or should that be for pay?
I think it should remain free, but it should be handled at the state level. The Department of Education was put in under Carter's administration, and the quality of education has not gone up, period. It's just wasted money.
So you're still on board for free primary education, just not college?
If that's what the state supports, yes.
So, but would there be anything? So you think that's a good idea, but not tuition-free college?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Simply because the amount of money required to do it from let's just say kindergarten, all the way up through, we'll say at the end of a bachelor's degree, is so exponentially more expensive than keeping it in the K through 12 range. At the end of the day, a lot of our states are in a budget deficit. Federally, we're in a massive budget deficit, and the debt we pay, I think, kind of $300 million in debt payoffs each year, and we get more in debt interest off that each year. So we're digging ourselves into a deeper hole, and fiscally, we need to be careful with that. So I wouldn't push it all away. Maybe one day a state could do that if the state voted on it, but they would need to be fiscally responsible with it.
What about Wall Street? What is libertarians' view on Wall Street regulation, or Gary Johnson's in particular? Does he have any policies addressing reining in the reckless gambling on Wall Street?
Well, one of the biggest things that Johnson pushes for is more economic freedom. But in doing that, he wants to do it in such a way that it gets rid of corporate lobbying. So, for example, one of his big policy positions is to get rid of both income and corporate tax and replace it with a federal consumption tax. So, if
that'd be like a VAT, a value-added tax kind of a thing?
Essentially. So, if you were, ex-business and you wanted to buy, so many vehicles for your company's fleet, you would pay the value-added tax on top of that, and you wouldn't be able to dodge the tax loophole on that. Cuts out almost all corporate lobbying off the bat and makes our economic system way more transparent.
Okay, well, everybody's on board for getting corporate lobbying money out of government, but that doesn't really seem to address the Wall Street in particular right now, because right now they're able to kind of what we refer to as gamble. They say invest. Gamble with people's savings because Glass-Steagall was repealed by the Clinton administration. Does Gary Johnson favor reinstituting Glass-Steagall or anything that would address that issue?
I'm not personally sure on Gary Johnson's position on Glass-Steagall, so I can't speak on his behalf. Okay. As for the libertarian position, we always push for more personal freedom. So if you are a wealthy investor who has access to your own personal funds and you want to invest those funds as you see fit, you should be allowed to.
But do you think that banks should be able to gamble with people's deposits that are guaranteed by the federal government?
I think they should be allowed to, but I think they should be required to be transparent in that they're doing it, so that if you are uncomfortable as a banking member, you can go to a different institution that doesn't.
Right. There are only like 6 banks in the whole country now, though, right? Because of the consolidation.
That's part of the problem is, these banks have gotten so big because of the regulatory bodies in charge of them have sitting bank members on their boards. So again, it's trying to get the regulation done in such a way that it can't be corrupted like that.
Would the libertarian be in favor of breaking up the big banks and making smaller banks, making it more competitive?
We would argue that instead the big banks that are too big to fail, that in situations like 2008, if it wasn't for bank bailouts or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, these companies that took these risks would not actually have been able to survive. Unfortunately, yes, they would have gone out of business and money would have been lost, but their members would have actually been able to hold them accountable, because saying, if a banker sits there and say, I can make this risky investment, but my members don't have any potential losses, I'll take it. If they're actually gambling with people's money and people could actually lose their savings, they would be much more cautious. It's in economics, it's the elimination of moral hazard. In regards to Wall Street and the big banks and breaking them up, for us, for libertarians, not speaking for the Gary Johnson campaign, bailing them out, let them grow, because it became a game of favoritism. One goes down, one gets bought out, one gets bailed out by the Department of Treasury. It's just a very corrupt game. And if a normal person did that, are you kidding me?
So would you be right now in favor of making the big banks smaller, or how would you address it?
Well, I think the best answer to that from the libertarian perspective is that if we take away their bailout system, then they'll do it on their own, because they won't be able to support themselves anymore with the system they have in place.
Would you say that they've already proven that they really are reckless and criminal, and they really don't care if they fail, and they really don't care if they crash our economy? Because that's what it seemed like.
I think they care that they fail. I think they just know that they won't, because they'll be bailed out.
Okay. Hey, let's
take away that safety net. I think they'll be far more responsible.
Okay. That seems dangerous, but I understand.
Consequences accurately.
We all want people. Let's not move. Infrastructure is a big item. How do you feel about how do libertarians feel about the infrastructure spending?
Libertarians generally push for privatization of infrastructure spending.
Depends on which infrastructure.
Yeah,
Say, actually.
it comes down to the field.
Yeah. There is an economic term called a public good. It's something that cannot be supplied by the by the free market efficiently, because you cannot stop people from benefiting from it. Roads would be a good example of this, and I guess you could also argue some forms of electricity. Libertarians, depending on if they're anarchists or if they are not anarchists, would argue that the government is responsible for funding those things. It's just a question as to how.
Okay, so you are in favor of, say, like building roads and stuff like that, and so that's what people try to marginalize libertarians by saying that stuff, right?
It's one of the most popular bashings of the libertarian viewpoint. Not everyone is in favor of outright, on getting rid of the infrastructure for that. There needs to be a balance, I believe.
So you're in favor of public funding for education, primary level. You're in favor of public funding for roads.
Done on a state level and not done on a federal level. We would rather the 50 labs of innovation rather than the one national standard that, quite frankly, is so goddamn corrupt.
So what do a lot of people, like during the 60s, the federal government had to dispatch National Guard troops. They had to nationalize them to make sure that the Constitution was enforced and people's rights were protected, because the states weren't protecting their rights. How do libertarians deal with something like that?
Depending on what wing of Libertarian, again, speaking as Libertarian, not Gary Johnson campaign, I personally feel the role of the state government is to protect the rights of the individual from the federal government, and the federal government's role is to protect the rights of the individual from the state governments. If the National Guard is the tool by which they have to do so, then we respect it because it is that government's actual role. If it's a broad interpretation of the Constitution, I think you're getting in a little bit of a rough space with Libertarians, but end of the day, for Libertarians, it comes down to your belief in the role of government.
And you're not against stuff like the post office, right? People always try to say you're against the post office.
I think they're inefficient, but I'm not going to say get rid of them. I mean,
I would say give me some hard numbers and show me that the post office is more efficient. If you can show me that the post office is more efficient, sure, you can keep it. But if you're telling me that we're spending money less efficiently on the post office, if you're showing me that UPS and FedEx could do the same job at much cheaper and for much better, I think that you shouldn't fund the post office then. However, that doesn't carry over for everything, and you need to do that on a case-by-case basis. If you make broad statements about almost anything, you're going to get a lot of things wrong.
Okay, two final questions, and I appreciate you guys taking time to talk to us. The two other things people always like to talk about is Social Security and Medicare. So now, are Libertarians opposed to Social Security and Medicare?
It depends on which Libertarian you are. Again, the only perfect Libertarian is yourself, and there is no consensus on a lot of issues. There's just a broad, it's more of a zeitgeist than a single policy proposal.
Do you know where Gary stands? Does anybody know where Gary stands?
He believes that we need a safety net. He definitely wants to discuss reforming those safety nets to make them more efficient, more affordable, because we're hemorrhaging money out of them. But they are absolutely necessary, and we cannot take them away from people.
So he'd be for keeping Medicare and for keeping Social Security, not dismantling it.
In some form.
I would actually like to comment on that because he recently made a very insightful comment about it. I forget which interview this was at, but he said that he's for something called a subsidized income. I'm not sure if this would be in the form of a negative income tax or of a just basic income guarantee. Yeah. But this was put forward by Friedrich Hayek in the, I want to say 1940s, but I'm not sure. And basically what it is instead of giving means-tested welfare, you just basically send the poor a check. We spend enough money on entitlements of this country to give families under the poverty line tens of thousands of dollars, surely enough to put every single family in this country, which is below the poverty line, above it. Yet we don't. Why? Because 75% of that money is overhead. It goes to bureaucrats in their pockets, not to the people who are actually supposed to be getting the help at all. And what the negative income tax or what any kind of basic income guarantee would do, it just takes that money, cuts out the bureaucracy, and gives it to the people who need it. And this is the logic behind a lot of libertarian things. One of my favorite economists of all time, Milton Friedman, proposed an idea called the negative income tax. This would, I think, go slightly contrary to Gary because Gary doesn't want an income tax to begin with. Alaska, I love the way Alaska does it. Alaska,
Let's
keep our assumptions so that we have an income tax and then we have a negative income tax. So the way a negative income tax would work is that there would be the lowest tax bracket. Let's say for the sake of argument and the sake of arithmetic, it is $20,000. If you make anything below that, that is not taxed. And if you make anything above that, it is taxed. So if you make $30,000 a year, you have $10,000 worth of taxable income. But then let's say that you earn $0 in a year. You have negative $30,000 worth of taxable income because that's the difference between your income and the nearest tax bracket. And for the sake of arithmetic, I'm going to use 50% as a number for this next thing. You are given a reimbursement for what you can't pay. So if the lowest tax bracket is $20,000 and you have zero income for that year, you get 50% of that back, and you would get $10,000 from the federal government. And then what happens after that? Let's say I take that money and then I get a job. And then maybe I make $10,000 a year on top of that. Well, then what would happen the next year? I would file out my tax return, and I would have negative $10,000 worth of taxable income. And so I would have the $10,000 I already have, and that's not taxed. And in addition to that, I would also get 50% of what I can't pay, so that's $5,000. And what this has the effect of, it doesn't disincentivize work as much as other welfare programs. I've talked to a lot of people on welfare, and actually a lot of my close personal friends are on welfare, and they can't really get jobs because if they get a job, they lose their benefits. And if they lose their benefits and they, God forbid, get fired from their job, what are they going to do to feed their kids? They can't do anything. They're stuck in a trap. But what the negative income tax is, it takes away that because you will always be better off for working, and you will never lose your benefits just from that. You will only lose your benefits if you no longer make enough money.
Okay. So I just want to get back to the Social Security Medicare aspect of our conversation. Now, Medicare, studies have shown, is actually more efficient than private systems, and it's actually more,
studies?
more. What studies? You know what? Lots of studies. So almost every study I've looked at, I haven't seen a study that says the opposite. Have you seen one?
Yes, I have actually, and that depends on what we're defining as efficient. If you're defining efficient as getting people care, sure, but you know what? There are people in Europe who get care, and they have full coverage for everything. My friend in England needs to wait 6 months to get into a hospital. That's unacceptable here in a private market. You would never have that happen. People die. Right now, VA is a single-payer system. People die waiting for care. So it really depends on what we're defining as efficient coverage. If you're defining it as getting more people to nominally have health care, sure, that's correct. But if you define it as actually getting people the care they need, I have not seen evidence to suggest that, and I've actually seen evidence to suggest that Medicare people are worse off than if they had private health insurance or if they had no health insurance. I can't name the particular study on that one, but I believe it was done around in the 1996.
So studies show that the overhead was what I'm talking about. When I talk about efficiency, it shows that, in fact, overhead for Medicare is actually lower than it is for private. Right? So you know that, right?
Yeah, and you want to know why that is? Third-party payer.
What's that?
Third-party payer healthcare system. What a third-party payer healthcare system.
So that's like the single-payer Medicare. No.
No, single-payer is just single-payer is different. That's what they have in a lot of countries in Europe. But third-party system, third-party payer, that's what we have now. And what that is that you have the first two parties. You have the medical practitioner, and then you have the patient. And then you have a third party, the insurance company, and they pay for it. Right. But the thing is, there are 4 ways you can spend money. You can spend your own money on yourself, you can spend your own money on someone else, you can spend someone else's money on someone else, or you can spend someone else's money on you. And those last 2 categories of spending inflate costs because they hide costs from the people who are actually consuming the good. If everything was covered by healthcare and we didn't have, I will agree that single-payer healthcare is more efficient on that regard than third-party payer, but I don't think the solution is to go to third-party payer. First-party payer, I'm sorry. It's to go to a more free market system. I think that there should be, the way it's set up right now, you are pretty much forced to buy insurance. In fact, I actually think that's a law for Obamacare. And so let me ask you this. If having insurance pay for everything inflates costs, what's going to be the cost of Obamacare? Is it going to make Medicare costs go up or down? It's going to increase coverage. We've established that, but is it going to cut costs in the long run? And I would argue that it would be no, and I think the evidence is on my side in that one.
Yeah, so no, I agree with you. I think Obamacare will continue to inflate prices and put money, but the reason why it will do that is because it really was a giveaway to private insurance corporations and big pharma. And in America, we don't negotiate with our drug companies like they do in other countries. But listen, thank you so much for talking with us. I appreciate it. Any message you want to give to the people out there about Gary Johnson?
Do your own research. Whether or not you agree with him or not, I want you guys to look up Gary Johnson and Governor Weld. They did great things in their state. And the philosophy they represent is a much kinder and gentler libertarianism than what you may have seen online. Online, you may have seen a lot of self-proclaimed anarchists and very vulgar individuals shouting out ideas. But I want you guys to look into what might be more moderate kinds of libertarianism. I want you guys to get started. I want you guys to look up what Gary Johnson did, and I want you to look up the economics that backs up what he says. Don't take anything I say here at face value. What I want you guys to do, I want you to go out and then prove who is right. I want you to prove me right or you right.
Okay. Thanks a lot, you guys. Appreciate it.